California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Bill Lockyer. He is the Treasurer for the state of California. And so I want to speak with you about the budget and projections. You've heard this before, Wall Street complaining that the governor's projections are rosy, they're overly optimistic. Well, this year, the chief legislative analyst, you know where I'm going, said that the governor's projections were too pessimistic. What planet am I on? How did this happen?
Well, before, a lot of budget cuts were necessitated.
Right.
Tax increases occurred.
Sure.
The economy is improving. So a lot of reasons that now you can have a balanced budget. Now, a lot of that is the governor's discipline,
right,
and insisting that the budget be balanced and that they not, spend one-time money,
right,
in building program bases that then you can't finance later.
But were you surprised as a student of Sacramento that you actually had the chief legislative analyst saying the governor's budget was too pessimistic? I mean, you'd expect it to say, he was on target, but not too pessimistic.
Well, it's an argument about, and it's not a big argument. I mean, we're basically talking about a couple of $1 billion out of $100 billion.
Okay.
So,
it's a lot of money, but I hear you.
2%.
Well stated.
Okay.
Well
stated. And that's a forecast. That's how many cars are going to be sold this fall.
Right.
What kind of Christmas is there going to be? I mean, those are hard to
I
guess.
understand.
And so the governor's saying, well, let's be careful and not assume the higher numbers. And the analyst is saying, well, we think you're being overly careful.
But here's the question. Is Wall Street, therefore, celebrating at a certain level? I mean, Wall Street's been hammering California for years. Is it time to get the love back? Will we see it?
Well, I should distinguish between Wall Street in the sense of financial firms.
Right.
The J.P. Morgans of the world, or
right,
Wells Fargo or whatever. I mean, they want to sell bonds or
right,
to be involved in that process.
And that's your
We're
area.
doing that anyhow, yeah.
Right.
We're doing that in the bad times to try to stimulate some infrastructure spending and so
But
on.
we were paying higher rates. So has our credit rating improved to the extent that we can start paying lower rates, or is it lagging?
Well, answer is yes. Last January, the first credit rating uptick in 6 years occurred with S&P. And so we expect maybe there'll be more of those down the road. They usually want to see, the rating agencies, 2 or 3 years of solid budgets before they'll do an upgrade.
Wait, they're quick to drop our rating. The minute we have problems, they're dropping it, and we have to wait 2 or 3 years.
Their clients make more money when
Of
the
course
rates go
they
down.
do. But is that just the reality? I mean, there's nothing, that's just the way it is.
It's the way it is. And so, the good news is our reputation is improving.
Right.
Businesses are feeling more confident about stability and investment in California, and financing debt is the cheapest it's been in modern history.
Even despite the fact we've had some credit rating
Well,
issues.
we pay maybe 0.5% on 10-year debt, higher than the national average.
Okay.
I mean, it used to be much more than that. So that yield is squeezing, and it's great for taxpayers. Investors, it's still okay.
Right. Now, speaking of debt, we do know that the state owes about $28 billion. Is that accurate?
Well, it depends on which you're, there's different flavors of debt.
I know.
So there's money, Brad, internal borrowing.
Right.
And there's where we didn't really pay the Prop 98,
right,
K-14, so we're making up for what they didn't get in the past. That's getting reduced dramatically.
The internal debt.
Yes. That's going down over the next 4 years almost to nothing.
When we come back and we talk more about debt, because like you said, there are different types of debt, and I want to get it further explained. Okay. We're speaking with Bill Lockyer. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Treasurer, as we talk about the shell game of internal borrowing, that you had said is decreasing.
Yes.
But what about that external borrowing? Is that where the $28 billion figure comes into play, or am I off?
It's about the same number on both sides.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But we pay external debt, or whoever owned the bonds, they may be Californians,
right,
because of the tax advantage of having income that you don't pay state or federal taxes on, and we have a high personal income tax rate, so it's advantageous if you have the money to invest in bonds. So it may be a Californian, it may be someone from Pennsylvania or wherever. Usually they're domestic, they're not very often foreign purchasers. And that's the kind of, let's call it external debt. We pay several $billion a year on that debt. Now that paid for, like your home mortgage, paid for schools or mass transit or levies or other things. And so that's the borrowing that pays for a long-term asset, typically over 30 years. Then there's this internal borrowing, where one account borrows from another account and theoretically pays interest on it. But it's the state borrowing from the state.
But you've said, and I hope this figure is still accurate, that for California to significantly reduce its Wall Street debt, every Californian would have to pay about $2,500 to Wall Street, whereas in Texas that number is about $600. I hate to compare us to Texas, but that's a little troubling. Or is it?
Well, you have to ask, what did you get for it? So, you know, I am told that if you looked at the quality of public buildings, the schools or other things, that we compare well compared to other states. So you can't.
It's not apples and oranges, or it is apples and oranges.
Well, and you know, and we have a lot of frequent comparisons to Texas, probably because those governors that seem to have a lot of spare time like to come to California.
They don't have a full-time legislature in Texas, I think.
Well, the governor doesn't run very much, I'm told.
Oh, here you have it. I want to go back to the budget more generally, because it is an exciting time, I guess, given that we are in surplus. But just as an observer of the process, it just seems so shocking that it happened so quickly. I understand, sir, that we did have Proposition 30 pass, but it can't just be Proposition 30 that turned us from significant deficit to nice surplus. What's happening?
Well, three things. The economy is improving. And especially personal income is up. So people in California that are making money, now that's still not a majority of the people, but those that are on the high end are making more money, and they're doing pretty well. So that increases revenues. And then the governor and the legislature made cuts for 4 years, where every year they went back and whacked it some more. And so it reduces it substantially on an ongoing basis when you do that.
But does that beg the question that since we were cutting so dramatically over the last 4 years, since we are in surplus, we should start paying back some of those cuts? Or are we just not in that position yet and we need to continue to be frugal?
Well, yes, continue to be frugal. And frugality may suggest you restore some cuts. For example, we eliminated dental care for people, the poor people. Okay, you can do that on the short term, but eventually it starts costing you more. There are more illnesses that occur and so on. So it's short-term wise, long-term and prudent, and they need to figure out when the right time is.
But the governor's been pretty firm on not restoring. You talk about dental care and bipartisan support, the bill's not moving.
Well, the governor usually gets his way about these things, and you know, or 90% so. And so typically there'll be a little change in respecting the legislative perspectives. We don't know what that list is yet. We've heard a whole long list, and the wish list is a lot longer than the I'm willing to pay for it list.
And you also talked about personal income being up, which is always a good thing. But that again begs the question, we rely so much on personal income and capital gains. Is now the time to seize the moment and try to get some bona fide tax reform?
Well, I don't know what the tax reform would be. I mean, what's typically said is, well, gee, why don't you lower taxes on wealthy people and push it on to services in sales taxes for middle income people? Well,
that's not going to happen.
Well, I don't know about, the question is whether it should happen. I mean, we don't want wealthy people to move out of the state. We have to be careful about that. And taxes ought to be fair.
I hear you.
But I'm not sure that shift is a fair one.
We'll see what happens. He's Bill Lockyer. He's the Treasurer of the State of California. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
California voters have approved how many billions of dollars to finance upcoming infrastructure projects. According to the California Treasurer's website, California voters have approved the issuance of more than $65 billion in bonds to improve and build new schools, roads, housing, parks, and levees.
It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Kevin DeLeon. He's a member of the California State Senate. And so I want to speak with you about gun control, gun rights. I was recently in Washington, D.C., and there's no question that in Washington, the issue is quite polarizing. In California, not as much. We are seeing in Sacramento some significant developments on the gun control side. Could you talk to us, before we begin our deep discussion, about SB 140, a bill that was passed and signed recently?
SB 140 is a measure that was just passed by the legislative bodies. It was signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown. It is authored by Senator Mark Leno, who's the chair of the Budget Committee, and the pro tem of the California State Senate, Darrell Steinberg.
Right.
It's a very forward, common sense measure. It's very simple and straightforward.
Please.
What it does is it takes money from the DROS Fund from the Department of Justice and dedicates roughly about $20 million, gives that money to the police agency within the Department of Justice to go and confiscate roughly about 40,000 weapons on the streets of California. We have 40,000 weapons. The vast majority are handguns, and the others are high-powered assault weapons that are in the arms of individuals who are currently felons, who have temporary restraining orders, who are part of prohibited class, and those who have mental health issues.
Right, and that's the key. What this bill has looked to do is seize guns from individuals who may have obtained them legally, but since they obtained them legally, their acquisition, their purchase has become illegal because, like you said, they subsequently had a conviction or a restraining order. They were deemed with a mental illness. So that's the key distinction here.
Exactly.
Is that you're going after folks that no longer have a legal right to own guns.
Exactly. That's the main point.
So 36 additional agents will be hired to go after these folks.
That is the point.
That's a big deal.
They're going to go up and down the state of California.
Right.
Sometimes they're going to knock on someone's door. Sometimes they're going to wait for them to walk outside. I'm not going to give up the tactics of the police officers at the state DOJ level, as well as working in collaboration with local enforcement agencies. But they're going to go out there and confiscate as many weapons as possible.
That being said, you are looking at a bill, it seems to be an accompanying bill, a bill that would at some level modify SB 140, and it asks individuals whether they really want to be in the crosshairs of the law or if they want to voluntarily give up their weapons that they may have had legally at one time but no longer.
Exactly. That is my measure, which is SB 53, which is, in short, it's an amnesty bill for those individuals, those 40,000 individuals, or I should say those 20,000 individuals who have 40,000 weapons up and down the state of California. In short, it's an amnesty bill. We're going to give them a truncated period of time. We're going to notify them a direct letter to their house. We're going to say, hey, you have a gun or you have guns. This is the serial number. This is the exact type of weapon that you have. This is dramatically different from a buyback. A buyback program.
It's not a buyback.
It is not a buyback program. You can't go get your grandmother's Winchester rifle from the attic or from the basement and turn it in. We know precisely the serial number, and we know precisely the type of weapon that you have in your possession, and that's the weapon that we want exactly. So what it is, in effect, so we're saying, hey, we're going to give you a shot, one last shot, no pun intended. We're going to say, turn in your weapon. We're going to give you this amount of period of time. Turn in your weapon, no problems.
No criminal conviction.
Now, if you're a felon, no, it's dramatically different. If you are a felon already, you are not be able to participate in this program. And subsequently, if in fact we do find out that that weapon was used in a crime of some sort, obviously there will be criminal charge.
For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Senator, if an individual does not have any criminal warrants against them, but because of a conviction or because of a TRO or a diagnosis of mental illness, they still possess a firearm. Illegally because of that, if that's the only offense and they turn it in, there will not be a criminal charge?
Exactly. You know, and I think that's really important to notice because SB 140, you're going to have a police officer and the Department of Justice visit you, place of employment, place of residence. Someplace they're going to visit you. They're going to find you. We know your address. We know your phone number. We know where you are. We know where you live. And sometimes you actually moved and you're not there. But we'll figure it out somehow, some way.
How do we know? Look, when you think about the federal level, there's this whole notion of background checks.
The NICS system.
Exactly. And that system, some would argue, flawed, not complete. We know that at gun shows, you don't need to go through a background check, federally at least. But is it in California that we have a superior background check system that does not have a gun show loophole, and as a result, we do have adequate records of all guns owned?
I would say no question that the California background system is much more superior, far more superior to that they have in Washington, D.C., in the Department of Justice. There's no question. California is much more progressive and thorough and comprehensive when it comes to ammunition and when it comes to gun laws in California. Had the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives in the Congress in Washington, D.C., pass some modicum of meaningful reform.
Mention to me.
You know, the assault weapons ban, for example, had they had it passed in Washington, D.C., California would have still been 20, 25 years ahead of Washington, D.C., even with the passage. If they would have passed it, would have been 20, 25 years ahead.
Can we talk about that? Because it's so interesting to me that here we are in this diverse nation, 50 different states, and yet in the wake of Sandy Hook, we saw states like California, New York, move to pass more stringent gun control rules, whereas in other states, often in the center of the country, they went to make gun laws looser.
Less restrictive.
Less restrictive. Yeah. What is it? I mean, why is it that we are so divided on this issue? You know, in California, don't get me wrong, there are distinctions between inland and coastal California, but nothing like California versus Oklahoma or Arkansas.
Well, you know, I'd say that California is a very diverse state, obviously the most diverse state on planet Earth, not just in the United States. We have, you know, more than 50 counties here, different cultures, different norms and mores, different political ideologies. California is a reflection of the entire nation. It's a microcosm of the entire nation. You know, it's not a monolithic state.
It was a Republican governor, Duke Majan, that passed one of the most stringent assault weapons bans. I mean, he's the one that signed it.
California is much more progressive, forward-thinking, even if you have to take political risk. You know, obviously, then Republican Governor Duke Majan, who was a former Attorney General from the city of Long Beach, took a political risk, and he did the right thing for California.
So, given that California does have more progressive and or stringent gun laws, are we protected in your mind if the other 49 states have less restrictive or more restrictive laws, less restrictive laws, however you want to look at it, depending on your point of view?
We're not an island unto ourselves, obviously. What happens in, say, for example, Reno, what happens in Las Vegas, what happens in Arizona when they have gun shows.
Portland,
Oregon, there is a...
Mexico.
There is... Not necessarily Mexico.
Oh, really?
No, because the vast majority of high-powered assault weapons, handguns that are used by the drug cartels in Mexico, 85% of them come from the United States.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yes. Gun ownership in Mexico is illegal. They do not manufacture guns. The vast majority of high-powered assault weapons, if not all the handguns and ammunition that are utilized in all the grisly murders and massacres in Mexico and Central America due to drug cartels' presence in those respective countries, come from the United States.
So your bill, you know, the bill that deals with gun amnesty, it received Republican votes.
Yes.
Yeah. Why can't we get that same type of bipartisan support in Washington, D.C.? What's your analysis?
Well, I think the National Rifle Association and other gun advocates are extremely politically powerful. I think they have sent the fear of God into many Republicans, and not just Republicans, but other individuals.
But what about Republicans in Sacramento?
Well, I mean, we're a microcosm of Washington, D.C. as well, too. Not all individuals are going to support these measures.
Sure.
I have a measure dealing with handgun ammunition or ammunition, because I think ammunition
to tax
is fuel.
Bullets,
not to tax bullets, but rather, if you want to buy ammunition in the state of California, you're going to have a permit. We're going to have to do a background check, because if you want to hunt, you have to get a license. If you want to fish, you have to get a license. But you don't have to get a license if, in fact, you buy ammunition.
His name is Kevin DeLeon, member of the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
How much did the National Rifle Association spend in the 2012 election on direct and independent expenditures? 10, 20, 30, or $50 million. During the 2012 election cycle, the NRA expended $20 million in direct and independent expenditures.
This is Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Steve Adams. He's a member of the Riverside City Council. He recently announced that he is a candidate for Congress. The seat is currently held by Mark Takano. It is centered in the city of Riverside and surrounding communities. Sir, we thank you for joining us. What made you decide to file to be a candidate for the United States Congress?
Well, I was approached by a number of my community leaders and members within my community, both inside and outside the city that are within the district, and asked whether I would consider running for this office. And after a long search, talked with my family, met with a lot of people.
What about the committee of one, your wife?
She was a little gun shy,
I was going to say.
And we sat down with my wife. We have 3 daughters, and it will impact everybody. And we all sat together and we took some time, we looked at it, and everybody came together as one and said this was a good idea, and we think you're good for this region.
I was recently in Washington, D.C. I had the honor of interviewing 25 members of Congress. And one issue that came up repeatedly was the question of the sequester. If you were in Washington today, how would you look at the sequester? Or how do you look at it even if you're not in Washington?
Well, for the city of Riverside, I can give you, as a council member, what they brought before the Congress was bad legislation with the intent that it would inspire you to do good legislation later. And they went ahead and passed it and said, long before this legislation goes into effect, which is bad legislation, we'll all be inspired to do good legislation. Why don't you start with good legislation? And I think every citizen in America has got to be asking that question right now, because it was not good legislation.
What's interesting to me, and after I interviewed 25 members of Congress, I didn't see many of them that were pleased with the sequester, and yet it still is in effect.
Right.
And so it plays into the narrative, well, wait, you have Democrats and Republicans opposed to the sequester, and yet they can't seem to move on it. Why? What is that? Why is that happening? And what would you do to change that if you could?
Well, once again, you have to be open and transparent, and that's something we've kind of lost back in Washington, D.C. As a city councilman, I am apolitical. So I represent everybody. As a congressman, I will not surrender my pledge to represent everybody. And this is what we have to do. We have to think about the people we represent, not our party, and not government. And we have to get back to telling the people the truth. What's the best for the people? This was bad legislation. I don't have an answer why you would put bad legislation in place, and that with the hopes that that would inspire you to not bring good legislation in before it went into effect, and it still went into effect.
And it's so interesting you say that, because in California, municipal offices are nonpartisan. And I look at the Riverside City Council, I'm not sure if I know the party affiliation of each member, because you do seem to operate in a nonpartisan, bipartisan fashion. But you'll be running as a Republican. The Republicans currently are in the majority in the House. And it's a highly polarized body. I've interviewed many members who are freshmen, both Democrats and Republicans. They've joined this caucus called No Labels, and they want to be nonpartisan, bipartisan. But it seems that leadership has a real pull, and it's leadership on the Democratic side and the Republican side. So how will you be able to maintain that nonpartisan attitude that has been so successful in many city governments in California?
Well, I can tell you that, first as a police officer, now as a council member, I'm the last time that a citizen gets to sit down like you and I are talking right now and touch their representative. And we are representatives. And I'm running for the House of Representatives. And I'm going to bring that philosophy back to Washington, D.C. and remind them that your title is representative, your title isn't politician.
I have to ask you a question. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. As you know, there was a big vote on gun control legislation. And I'm not so much asking you for your position. Sure. Feel free to give it.
No.
But what was most interesting to me is when you're elected, are you elected to vote as your constituents would want you to vote? Or are your constituents electing you for you to come to an independent decision, regardless of what a poll might tell you from your district?
That's a great question, because people look for their representative to bring a leadership position in, to bring in information that they don't readily have available. And so you can research these issues, bring it back to your constituency, get their opinion, but I'm a representative of the people. But I will educate them, I will inform them, and that's what I've done as a council member, having sat on both sides of the barrel of a gun when I was a police officer.
I did, yeah.
I can give them an honest opinion on this. And I guess just one brief thought on this. One brief thought on this. Most of the incidents that we have, these horrendous incidents, came from people who are mentally disturbed.
Right.
We have to reinstate, and I got to go back to Ronald Reagan, and he's, every Republican's guru. He removed our mental health assistance when he downsized government. This is an area we need to reinstate. You see a lot of homeless, a lot of our returning veterans. Fortunately, we have programs for them, but we have other people that have mental issues that this could be short-stopped with proper medication, proper service, they can get back. But that's the root to this. It's not gun ownership.
Right.
It's the fact that we have mentally disturbed people that have access to weapons or have the ability, because they're not criminal, but they do have issues. And we have to address that. And I would go to the medical profession to get an answer to that, because I can't give you a straight answer on what's the best way to do that, but we do need to get them help again.
So that begs the question, because if you look at, for example, the background check debate, a lot of folks were simply saying, we're not trying to take your guns away. We just want to be able to screen everyone who buys a gun, not just those that buy guns at dealerships versus gun shows. So what's your sense of that one issue? Because as it stands today, I think it's either 40 or 60% of guns are not sold at dealerships and therefore not subject to background checks. So we can't determine if someone has a diagnosis of mental illness or a conviction.
I think the people that are opposed to background checks, and to a point I am, is because we don't have that mental health component. The people that are going out and committing these horrendous crimes are mentally disturbed. Most have actually had some form of contact with mental health professionals.
Or law enforcement.
And there's no way, or law enforcement, there's no way to put that into the system without violating their rights of privacy. And I don't know how you do that. I honestly don't have an answer to that. Background check to make sure felons aren't buying guns. I think the results were like 2% of...
it's low.
It's very low.
It is
we'll
very
do that
low.
because they're not known for going into
but here's the
locations
question.
to do it. But if it helps prevent one killing, I'm for it.
Oh, that's interesting. But here's the question. Those felons may not be going to the dealers because they know that if they go to the dealers, they'll get background checked. If they go to a gun show, there's no check.
Right. And that's an inherent distrust in government. It really is. What happened to the people that registered guns on the East Coast? A newspaper went and published where they lived, showed their house and everything.
Which is troubling.
And that's what people are afraid of.
And that's a
and then
press
they
issue.
also think, well, how do I trust my government? Now we have the IRS targeting certain groups. How will we prevent and how will we know that the government won't target certain groups, political reasons or whatever, to go after them because they are gun owners? So I am adamantly opposed to disarming the American public.
And I don't think many people
And I can say as a
support
police
that.
officer, we can't get there in time every time. And you have to be able to protect yourself, you have to be able to protect your family, you have to be able to protect your property. And with realignment, a big problem here, we have 37,000 new criminals on our streets. You see them out there every day. We have to be able to protect ourselves.
So would you support expanded background checks to cover, for example, the gun shows?
I would like to see how that would work, but I'm not opposed, once again, as a police officer and as a parent and as a husband, if I can prevent one death, I'll do what I can to do that, because that death is devastating not only to the person who gets killed, but their family and beyond. And so I don't believe any legal gun owner would argue that.
In our final moments, you got, 18 months to go, whatever it may be. What are you going to do?
Well, unfortunately, this is about raising money also, but my outreach is to the people. When you hear the door knock, you may see my face.
You may.
And I've done that my entire career as a council member, and I will continue to do that, to be outreach to the people and get their voice and hear what they have to say.
He is Steve Adams, member of the Riverside City Council, candidate for the United States Congress. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.